So these are native to Asia, but years ago they were brought over to the United States and they were planted. They're called maidenhair trees sometimes. So that's not the actual, it's actually got a really cool scientific name, but I'll tell you that in just a second. But they're called maidenhair trees, and they planted them like Main Street, USA places, you know, down Main Street. They planted them because they were kind of pretty, because the leaves turn this really pretty yellow color. And there are males and there are females of them. There was a problem with that because you only wanted the males. You didn't want the females because the females produce a seed, a round seed. It's about the size of maybe a large marble, but it's white in color. And when the seed drops, of course, and you know, it's ready to germinate, the problem is it smells really, really bad. The seeds start to rot and decompose, and people say like it actually smells like vomit. So all of these pretty tree-lined streets in Maine town, USA, people walking down, and all these seeds were decomposing. And of course, they found out later on that, you know, you only bring in the male maidenhair trees. You don't plant the female. A lot of trees have a male and a female. Most of them, though, like if you think about pine trees or you think about flowering plants, in those cases, you know, the male and the female is many times found on the same plant. But these are different. These maidenhair trees. The real name for maidenhair, or the scientific name, which I think is a neater name, is this. Maybe you recognize that word. Maybe you might not recognize it as a word for the name of a type of tree or anything like that. But years ago, I remember there was a, you know how herbal things go through fads where like, oh, you should take, I remember shark cartilage for a while. Everybody was taking if you didn't want to get cancer. Because guess what? Sharks don't get cancer. Oh, well, it must be their cartilage. Well, anyway. It wasn't that reason, but do you guys remember this ginkgo biloba as some sort of as a supplement a few years ago? It was very popular. It's probably not. Well, it's not as popular now. I think you can still buy it. You can go to Publix and still buy it. No, not till November. I think November 15th or something like that. Okay. Anybody remember seeing ginkgo biloba touted as some sort of, or maybe it's G-I-N-K. Doggone it. Ginkgo. G-I-N-K. G-I-N-K. That's how you do it. They said it was good for memory. They said it was good for helping you remember things. Okay, so people were buying this stuff. And of course, whenever you say something like that about some sort of an herbal medicine, there's always the thing about the placebo effect that comes into play there. So some people would say, yes, ever since I've taken it, I remember things, you know, and have a better memory and all that sort of stuff. And other people were like, yeah, well, anyway, so it, you know, its fad or its popularity as a fad sort of herbal thing faded in a few years. So nobody really knows for sure. I guess there's probably, if you looked online, there may be some chemical in ginkgo that might have some similarity in memory retention, but who knows? I mean, if it was all that in a big a thing, my guess it would still be a fad. But the neat thing about these really is back during the dinosaurs, back during the Mesozoic, 65 to 200, 250, 225 million years ago, these plants, these kinds of plants, these ginkgo plants were very very common everywhere. As a matter of fact, there were many different species of ginkgos. This one right here belongs to the phylum named after it. It's the phylum, we're going to see it later on. It's called the phylum Ginkgophyta. It's the phylum of all the ginkgos. Yeah, I don't remember. I guess maybe I don't know, maybe 10 or 15 years ago it was popular. But in the phylum Ginkgophyta, back during the dinosaur era, there were a lot of members. Just like if you remember from Bio 1, it's kingdom, phylum, class. So phylum, so think about talking about the phylum Ginkgophyta, relate that to talking about the phylum, let's say, Chordata. Now, you may not know what the phylum Chordata is yet. You are going to learn later on. But the phylum Chordata, to make it really simple, is the phylum on Earth of animals with backbones, with vertebral columns. So how many different vertebrates are there out there? If you had to make a guess, or give me some sort of an estimate, how many vertebrates exist on Earth? At all? How about a qualitative answer? Do you not have to give me a quantitative? That's a good answer. Yeah, sure, why not? I'd go with that, something like that. Maybe thousands, maybe tens of thousands. You never really know, how many different species there are. We'll go through them and we'll talk about them. There's probably, gosh, fish are 30,000. Okay, I don't know, maybe, I don't know, 70, 80,000 overall, but there's a lot, isn't there? There's a lot of species of vertebrates. However, so the phylum Ginkgophyta, of which ginkgo biloba belongs to, is represented on Earth today, that phylum, by one species, this one right here. This is the only member of the phylum Ginkgophyta. This is like me saying, this is like me showing you an animal and saying this is the only vertebrate that's alive today on Earth from a time in which the vertebrates were all over the place. Like, say, if we went millions of years into the future from now, and some science teacher, he wouldn't be a vertebrate, obviously, maybe he'd be a plant, who knows, holding up and say, this is, this rat that's alive on Earth today is the only member of the phylum that includes all these vertebrates. When you look at that and you think about how life evolves on Earth in this big bush, right, with different, we talked about the cladogenesis and species breaking off and gradually changing and rapidly changing. And you think about all the success stories. Remember, I told you really mostly failures. And you realize that this one organism right here, if you look at that branch, it weaved its way through millions of years to become, or to end up, I guess you should say, not become, but to end, talk about a bottleneck, right? To end up becoming being the only member of its phyla left on Earth today. Now, as I said, the phylum Ginkgophyta was a lot bigger back then, much bigger back then. So think about the extinction event occurred and the adaptability and what this organism itself had to make. Maybe the stinking, rotting seeds helped. I don't know. Usually when things smell, it smells for a reason, and that's to attract something. So my guess is there's something out there that likes the smell of all that. Jared and Kaylee, Tiffany, hello. How you all doing? See, you guys came in. So anyway, I was up in Indianapolis, and they have maidenhair trees everywhere, and that's where I got this ginkgo leaf. I'm going to bring them into you and show you. It's neat too, because it feels it doesn't feel like a plant. It feels more like a fabric of some type. It's really very cool. They're the neatest things, I'll tell you. Well, but I got a bunch of them, and I'll bring them in. I thought for sure when they if they were going to X-ray my bag on the way flying back, they were going to like, what in the heck are those things? Because they have a very distinctive shape. All right, we'll talk about ginkgos later. Maybe, no, not today. We won't get into today, but we will. Any questions for me about anything having to do with anything before we go off and start talking about chapter 30, which is the seed plants. Go on to the next type of plants. I've got a picture of the Earth. Wait a minute, this is not the right picture of the Earth. I want to show you. I want to kind of give you that frame of reference. Here's where we are right now, talking in time. We're in the Carboniferous. Okay, it's that swampy ferns, whisk ferns, horsetails, non-vascular. And vascular, but no seeds. Nobody's got no seeds around here. All we got is spores. But it's a really good environment because it's swampy and like maybe you would imagine that down here in the corner, that's not an apple or an orange or some sort of a fruit hanging off, because those aren't around yet. But that might be a sporangium, right? That might be one of those Cooksonia-like sporangiums that we were looking at, right? So the Earth is very rich in vegetation during this time. This is why we call it, once again, remember, we call it the Carboniferous. And, just as a side, there's probably things like this crawling around in there. Oh, right? Look at this thing. This is a, what? Fish with legs? An amphibian with a tail that looks like a fish? This is a critter. This is the adult. And yeah, these are legs. I don't remember the name. Oh, geez, what is it? It starts with a Y. It's really kind of a cool name. But this is a fossilized critter animal from that time period. All right. So from the time period of the picture I just showed you, the swamp. Look, if somebody told you this was a swamp critter, wouldn't you kind of say, "Oh, okay, looks like a swamp critter. Looks like a critter I'd find in a swamp. It's a eel-like, lizardy, slimy thing with a tail that probably moves like a snake, right? Just so happens to have legs. Just so happens to have legs." Well, what this is a fish, or a fish-like thing that lived in those swamps back then. So you see how all this, if you think about it, it's not too far-fetched to imagine these kinds of critters inhabiting areas like that. Okay, and so what we're doing here is, here's where the continents are right now, right? So what we got is a lot of different areas. Got a lot of different habitats. We got a lot of different inland areas, so you can get the really dense carboniferous forest. The Earth is moving, or the continents are moving in that picture on the top from left to right in terms of time. Yeah, right, 345 to 355. So we're going further back in time as we go to the picture on the left. So that top part, which is actually going to become North America, this part right here is going to become North America. This is Gondwana, which is going to become South America. You can see over on the right, these parts are going to be parts of China and Asia as these things are drifting. So here they are. They're drifting apart. Some pieces of this are going to become India coming off of this part of the continent. All right, so what we got here, look at the mountain ranges. This was a time, the Mississippian, if you look in some other books, the Carboniferous period will be broken up into the Mississippian, and they talk about coal deposits. That's why they call it the Mississippian. This was a time period in which a lot of coal, which coal, remember, is decomposing plant material, right? Peat, lignite, I showed you that in chapter 29. But in the Mississippian period, you get a lot of mountains building. Now, remember what mountains do. They diversify habitat. They not only diversify habitat vertically, right, living at the top or living at the bottom, but, I grew up, well, I didn't grow up, but I lived a number of years when I was younger in Spokane, Washington, which is on the east side of the state. So here's Spokane, or on the east side. Washington's basically kind of a rectangle. And Seattle's over here. Now, everybody knows Seattle's rainy and all that sort of stuff, even in the summertime. It's a pretty area, but it is, it's a temperate rainforest. Spokane, 300 miles to the east, so like the distance between here and Miami, was basically a desert kind of like conditions. And it would be sometimes in the summer, it'd be raining and 65 in Seattle. And in Spokane, it would be 112 degrees in the sun. There was a mountain range in between. And so that was deflecting the air coming off of the ocean, that really moist air. It was reflecting it up, causing it to move up. It was dropping its moisture, and what came over the other side was much drier air. So you get what's going on here is this idea that the world is becoming drier, it's becoming wetter, coastline, it's just always changing. So at this particular time period, what we got is this carboniferous forest. So plants are really kicking butt, man. I tell you, they're growing, they're producing, they're thriving, their spores are working, but there's always, you want more. There always is, I want a little bit more. So can I live in other areas? So as we move away from the water, can I live just another 6 feet that way? Can I live just another 8 feet that way? Can I live just in an area just a little bit drier or cooler? And you think, why would plants want to do this, or any organism do this, or have the ability to think this? Well, I'm not saying they think it, but remember what happens when you move into a new area. If you can survive in a new area, you're the only one there. At least in the beginning, you got the place to yourself. So you can disperse, you can stretch out your legs. It's like, when I was riding the airplane, riding on the plane this weekend, it was nice because on one of my flights back, one of the seats wasn't sold, whatever the case may be. So the guy we did have to sit, next to each other because I had a middle seat because I didn't realize now you got on an airline, you got to pay if you want to sit on the aisle. So I'm like, shh. So I was sitting in the middle seat. So here's where we are, right? That's what I'm talking about. Chapter 30. We're in an area where we're moving into different ecosystems, and those ecosystems are putting demands on organisms. And one of the biggest demands it's putting on them is to deal with harsher and harsher climates, drier, more colder, more ultraviolet rays, more less protection from ultraviolet. As soon as you moved out of water, that was a concern. So there was this evolutionary trend. Remember I told you at the beginning of the semester, this is all about evolution, so we're sticking with that. There was this evolutionary trend in plants that's actually very remarkable because you don't see it just once among living organisms. There was a trend among plants to protect offspring more, all right, to provide them more of a head start, right? To help the young a little bit more before they go out on their own, okay? And this idea of trying to do things, of being ready to do something very quickly, okay? So and this is where we're going to be moving to when we talk about the seed plants. We're going to be moving to this idea of protecting that delicate part of the plant, protecting the gamete part of the plant, protecting the offspring. And if you think about this, right, animals do something very similar, don't they? If you think about this sort of the evolutionary path of animals, I know we haven't talked about it yet, but we know, like, if we think about one end of the organisms out there, the ones that are similar to us, we do a lot for our offspring, don't we, right? We do a lot not only during the time when that offspring is developing. I mean, this is after the fertilization, after the egg and sperm have united, right? We do a lot for the offspring. Female carries the offspring for a period of time. And then even after that, among the mammals, which is why the name is mammals, there are the mammary glands, correct? So, there's this thing we see in animals very clearly, that in certain groups of animals, what they began to do was kind of concentrate more on taking care of their young and having fewer young, right? Versus the other organisms out there that were having lots of young but not taking much care about them at all. Now, which one? Neither. They both still exist today. So among certain species, depending on where you are, in this time frame today, right, where the world is, that's working for you. Don't change. So just for a second, take a look at these things. Does anybody know what these are that is in the hand of this person in the picture? What these green things are? Yeah. Right, Justin. Excellent. They're called mangrove pencils sometimes because, they look like a pencil. And if you notice the one at the very top, it's pretty obvious there. You can see that it's already sprouting roots. Now, mangrove pencils are seeds. They're mangrove seeds, just like Dustin said. And they're the way they grow, evolution, oh my goodness, this is so incredible. They grow so they float this way in the water. You've seen them. If you've been at the beach, you might have seen them float by or in the waterways or anything like that. Well, now the currents carry them and they disperse, which is important. That's what seed's for. And disperse, move away, so we don't have to compete for resources and all that sort of stuff. So these mangrove seeds, if they're floating around and they happen to float the wrong way and they float out to sea, well, then that's going to be a problem because they're not going to survive, obviously, okay? But we know that. We've talked about that. But you know that some percentage of them are going to float the other way, and they're going to float towards the shore. All right, and they're going to bob and bob. And finally, what's going to happen is they're going to touch down on the bottom of the shore. Now, they're immediately, very, very quickly going to start sprouting roots because the whole idea there is once you can touch, you better make sure you hold on very quickly because you don't know the next big wave could come and wash you away, right? So you're going to really start growing fast. So there's a term we use to refer to mangrove seeds that is actually kind of technically not correct. Among animals, when we talk about animals that give birth to living offspring, like you and I, right? We don't lay eggs. You know, you're not reptiles, not birds, anything like that. But we give birth to live offspring. That's called being viviparous. Viviparous means to give birth to live offspring. If you lay eggs, then there's another term for it, and we will talk about this with the animals again. But the other term actually has another word for egg. It's oviparous. Oviparous. You might, if you were into dinosaurs as a kid, you maybe learned there were certain dinosaurs that were oviraptors. There are even critters today that are oviraptors. Critters today raccoons are oviraptors. They're egg eaters. They attack and eat eggs of other organisms. But seeds are a weird thing. We don't see really equivalent in animals too much because seeds are a living, fertilized thing, ready to start growing, but kind of in a state of suspended animation. It's really dead, but not alive. But the reason why we use the term viviparous to refer to the seeds in the mangrove pencils is when they drop off of the mother plant, if you will, of the host plant, right, and they start drifting, they're very much, they don't really germinate. They come out of germination really quick. So we say that they're basically born alive, if you will, and that's why it's not the exact use of the word, but it reflects what I mean about the fact that a seed is something that is used by plants for protection, for lasting through a hard environment, but it's going to vary sometimes depending on the species that you're talking about. So in the case of a mangrove, that seed is he's got one eye, it's got one eye open already. It's not basically in that suspended state like those seeds that are sitting in the bags of the beans on the public shelves, right? You can go buy kidney beans. Kidney beans are seeds. If you come and planted them, they grow. Well, how long do you think they've been sitting on the shelves there? Okay, so you understand what I mean by being a viviparous plant, a live-bearing plant? It gives birth to a seed that's very long, that's very far along in development. Okay, so about this time during the Carboniferous and that huge swamp that we got some plants out there that are experimenting with different ways of doing things, and one of those are these things we call progymnosperms. Now, gymnosperms are a type of plant we're going to talk about. Here we'll get to those today, but basically gymnosperms are cone-bearing plants. Okay, pine cones, pine trees are gymnosperms, but these weren't pine trees because the word pro, or the root pro, refers to these were the trees that came right before them. Okay, so progymnosperms are not gymnosperms, but they were right along the line as we got to gymnosperms. Basically what a progymnosperm was, because if you look at the picture, they didn't have cones. Okay, gymnosperms, like I said, cone plants have cones. They had sporangia, just like we looked at on a fern. And even if you looked at the picture on NA of what we think they look like, progymnosperms were really just really big sperms. No, really big ferns is what they were. They learned how to make really strong vascular tissue, so they learned how to grow really tall, which is good for outcompeting each other for life, isn't it? But you're still sticking with the sporangia and, you know, kind of like the sori on the fern. So you're really a fern. You might say that today, you know, tree ferns would be kind of gymnosperm-like. They're not genetically gymnosperms, obviously, but you see what I mean. They're just basically big ferns. All right, and this one that we're seeing in the picture, you can have a name, which is kind of interesting. That's why Archaeopteris as opposed to Archaeopteryx. Be careful. Archaeopteryx was the bird reptile, wasn't it? Remember? Some gymnosperms were homosporous. Some are heterosporous, but they're still seedless. I want to make sure we recall heterosporous and homosporous. That's going to become important. If you remember when we were talking about the seedless, vascular, and the non-vascular, the mosses and the ferns and all those, we mentioned there were two types of spores. There were spores that were homospore, or two types of plants when it comes to spores. Those that produced homosporous spores, or those that produce heterosporous spores. All right, like the moss, the hair cap moss produces a male and a female gametophyte. The Antheridia are on the male, the Archegonia are on the female. Those gametophytes each come from different types of spores. So there's a male spore, female spore, heterospores. The fern, if you remember in lab, if you looked at it under the microscope, the fern, the gametophyte that forms out of the fern is a bisexual gametophyte. It's not sexual preference again, folks. Remember, what it means is on that one plant, there is an Antheridia and an Archegonium. So they have them on the same thing. It's no different than what I was saying at the beginning of class, where, you know, in pine trees, you have the male and the female cones on the same tree. Whereas in some species, even today we'll talk about some of them, that it's different. Well, we might not get to them, but it's different than that way. You have a male and a female plant. The maidenhair, the ginkgo, of course, male and female, right? Okay, so now that's going to become important because that heterospores condition is going to become the dominant one, and that's going to lead us to this whole idea of producing, you know, cones and flowers and all this sort of stuff, but we're still seedless. Moving out onto land, moving out onto dry land, moving out onto different land, moving out onto land that was a little less forgiving. Water's forgiving. Edges of the waterway are even forgiving, but out there, boy, I tell you, it's not. If you're gonna want an embryo to survive, you're gonna have to give it a few things. Like you gotta protect it as long as you can. You're gonna have to provide food for it. At least give it a start. Give it a starter kit. Here you go, Junior. This is what you got. You know, here, pack of gum and a bottle of Kool-Aid. It's up to you to figure out the rest, right? I'm gonna give you started. Dormancy, we've talked about this before. Seeds are good for that, right? Seeds are good for dormancy because you can, remember when we said that evolution, if you don't change to the changing environment, you go extinct, right? But you do have another option. There is a clause. The clause is that instead of going extinct, you could make some dormant thing. You could make a spore, a cyst, or a seed, and maybe survive and wait for the condition to become better in the future. You don't know that's going to happen, but you don't know it's not either. And it's also good for dispersing, right? So if you have this seed thing, especially if you do something like later on, the smart ones, not the pine trees, because remember, there's no fruits on pine trees, folks, right? But the flowering plants, the plants that produce flowers, they produce fruits, and fruits enhance dispersal. And we already know why dispersal is good, because getting away from, you know, resources, it's resource competition. You don't want to compete for resources. But I guess I want to talk for just a second, or see if we can't y'all figure out, why do you think fruits enhance dispersal? And of course, think about it in an evolutionary sense. If they did, whoa, what benefit would I get? How do fruits enhance dispersal? What do you think? Think about your relationship with fruits. Your relationship with fruit. Hold on, I gotta put my glasses on. They're sweet, they taste good, right? Yeah, of course. So animals coming along and they're eating them, right? We can't photosynthesize. So why does the plant make that beautiful fruit? It doesn't make it for itself. It doesn't make that sweet tasting fruit for itself. It makes it for whoever comes along, and it's enticement. Here, there, critter, take this thing, chew on it, blah, 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 you're sloppy, and like think about berries, right? Blah, blah, blah. Guess what I'm dropping all over the ground? Pieces of fruit. And the pieces of fruit is the candy. But in that fruit, what's in the fruit? What's in the fruit? Seeds. Woo, seeds, right? Seed, little tiny juniors. So as you're walking through, you're dropping and dispersing these things everywhere. Holy cow, if you can figure out that, if you can do something like have a bird do it for you, look at that. The bird eats the berries. We've all seen it, right? You see scat on the ground, you look, and you can recognize that there's seeds in there. Goes through the digestive tract while the bird is flying, then it comes up gosh knows where, right? What a great thing. The seeds are what you want to get dispersed. The fruit is, hey, buddy, I'll give you $10 to take my kid across and disperse them. All right? Perfect. Works perfectly. And then, of course, if you think about it, all the coevolution that occurs with that. You know, the animals evolving along with the fruits and the plants you know, it's all amazing that when we look at evolution, it becomes, after a while, hopefully by the end of the semester, you guys start seeing it's meta evolution. It's organisms evolving together like the whole planet. It's very cool. Well, we like to eat fruits too. That's why it says it's one of the biggest world's primary producers. So, and before we actually get into fruits, I want to step back and go to seeds for a second. I want to talk about 4 things that seed plants came up with that really gave them the edge on terrestrial environments, right, on land. Plants are already out on land, but eking it there kind of in the wet areas, in the swampy areas. Now, we're going to talk about what it's like to live out there with the big boys, out there in the desert and that kind of stuff. So let's talk again for just a second, well, for a while, about seeds. Seeds develop from things called ovules. A little bit later on in models and maybe on in your book, you'll see something labeled an ovule. An ovule is a seed. An ovule is the thing that's going to become the offspring, right? The ovule is going to be the embryo. Like if you see on the right-hand side in that picture, that's the ovule, that thing. It's been cut open, right? You can, it's been drawn, obviously. But the little blue thing that's inside, there's my pencil, the little blue thing inside, that's the embryo. That's the offspring. See? It's already got a root meristem. It's already got an apical meristem. Right, it's already got. Remember, these were the cells that you looked at under the microscope in Bio 1 for mitosis, because lots of stuff's going on down there. They're growing down. They're getting ready to grow up. So it's got a root and it's got a shoot, so it knows which way to grow. What do you think these 2 things are? What are those 2 things? Or what are they going to become? I'll erase it maybe. What are those 2 little appendages there? What do you think they're going to become in the plant? Leaves, branches. Yeah, that's right. Right? So you can see it's almost like a little mini plant already. Now, yeah. Now, if you took a corn seed, now probably the corn that if you bought at the store, you might not see because that corn may not have even been grown long enough to get to this point. But if you took a natural corn kernel and you cut it open, you would notice that one of the things that you see in there, actually most of what makes up the corn kernel, the part that when you pop corn, the white part, this part here, this part is all called endosperm. As a matter of fact, the seed or the developing embryo of a corn is this little thing of a corn plant right down here in the corner. The endosperm is the stored food. Okay, it's got kind of a weird name, but that is the little food packet, the starter packet that's given to the place here up above. You see it as well in the green, the stored food. A little bit of food supply for the embryo. Like I said, here's a little bit to get started. So we've got this, you know, developing embryo. We give it a little bit of a food packet. We give it a little bit of a starter, give it a little bit of chance of surviving. And then we also wrap it in a very strong or a very durable integument or a seed coat. And the seed coat is made of sporophytic tissue. So sporophyte tissue, remember, is diploid. Haploid tissue, gametophytes, are haploid, right? Half the number of chromosomes. And remember, I said the reason why we see kind of this shifting from haploid to diploid is because all you need is a set of genetic information, folks. All you need is one. All you need is one set of chromosomes. And if that works, that works. And it obviously does, because we see lots of gametophytes around. We see moss gametophytes. But in a harsh world, it sometimes helps if you have a double set of chromosomes like sporophytes. So sporophytes become the choice, if you will, among organisms that deal with harsher, more changing environments, which is really a lot of the world. So that's why we see a lot of more diploid organisms out there. Okay, so you're going to take that tougher sporophyte tissue and wrap it around the phytic tissue inside that developing embryo. Give it a little bit of food. Allow for a dormancy, sometimes even longer than in spores. Some seeds can last quite a long time. And then, as I said, you can make them in such a way for dispersal. You can put them in fruits, as we talked about. You can make them fly, like the milkweeds, or the red maple. Wait for the red maple plants here in Florida. They make those things with little wings on them. When they fall down, guess what they're doing? The wind is pushing them, right? Dispersal. Everybody knows dandelions and milkweed. Cooper, oh my goodness, Cooper is probably should get an award from the beggar ticks out there for all the beggar ticks that he drags along when he goes out in the woods with me. All right, them little sticky things. The dude that invented Velcro got his idea from looking at beggar ticks under a microscope. They're not ticks. They're not animals. They're seeds. But the way the little hooks work, like in Velcro, that's how beggar ticks work. That's why they work so good. Sand spurs. In the water, the lotus, which is an aquatic plant, would have floating seeds. Cattails and coconuts would do that. So would the mangrove would fit in this category. Oh, these guys, the bursters. Remember I told you in the horsetails, the elater, that the spores sometimes had a spring behind them. So it shot so it dispersed. Remember, it's all about that. Well, flowers can do that often by pressure. So boom, and they can disperse the seed. Sometimes a pretty good distance. I think witch hazel can kick its seed out of, I don't remember how far. Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, that's right. I mean, the problem is most people, when they go to the store or Publix, when they're buying produce or any other store, not just Publix, they want to see perfectly round red tomatoes that all look the same and taste the same. Nobody wants to use the wrinkly one which is most of the tomatoes, right? A lot of that stuff goes into sauces and stuff, but still. Yeah, I think that's why always when you grow stuff in the garden, you go, man, it tastes significantly different. We disperse seeds, right? We disperse beans and weeds, and that's only, as by accident, but also on purpose, right? We ship stuff around, and of course that disperses seeds, and that's how plants can disperse as well. That's why we get a lot of invasives in this country sometimes from things like that. All right, any questions about seeds, right? Pretty important stuff. It's seed, it's not just a spore. That's a good motto. If I were a seed, that would be my motto. I'm a seed, I'm not just a spore. Okay, let's talk now about let's talk now about what's going on with this reducing gametophyte. Now, what do we mean by reducing gametophyte? Is not that we're reducing its purpose. The gametophyte, again, is that haploid tissue, right? That alternation of generation. Remember, plants have alternation of generation as well. So they have they have a gametophyte and they have a sporophyte. So what we're talking about is we've seen a trend. We've seen it already, if you think back, of the gametophyte is getting less prominent, right? Sometimes smaller, and the sporophyte is kind of becoming more into the forefront, okay? So if you think about the mosses and the other non-vascular plants, so starting on the left, and I put it in red, the gametophyte was dominant at the first, and the sporophyte was reduced. So the gametophyte, remember, was the green part of mosses. I said you walk through the woods and you look at a moss, you're looking at gametophytic tissue. You're looking at gamete. Now you know today, right, if you're looking at a tree, you're looking at sporophyte, because the gametophyte in a tree is, as we said, it's microscopic, we follow through on this, right? So not only is the sporophyte reduced or not dominant, but it's also nutritionally dependent on the gametophyte. Remember, it grows out of the top of the gametophyte. Remember, like in the haircap moss, sporophyte comes out the top, makes spores through meiosis, makes bunches of spores through mitosis, spits them out in the environment, its part is done. So mosses spend most of their life as this haploid gametophytic tissue. Okay. Now, what we saw was going on in the ferns is the fact that the gametophyte got real small, got that little heart-shaped thing that you see in the picture there. Remember, it's a bisexual gametophyte with the Antheridia and the Archegonia. But those are really, really small. The big part, the dominant part, if you will, not again in behavior, is obviously the fern frond, the sporophyte. The sporophyte produces the spores, the gametophyte produces the gametes. So what we see between the mosses and then the ferns and vascular plants, more attention paid to the sporophyte, more attention to producing spores. Spores which are more durable. Okay? Mosses might be able to get away with less durable, less emphasis on spores because of a more forgiving environment. But we're moving on into drier and harsher environments. Now, where we're moving to in the seed plants, the gymnosperms and the angiosperms that we'll move into, is the fact that the gametophyte becomes smaller and smaller and smaller and actually becomes microscopic. It becomes microscopic, dependent upon and inside of the sporophyte. Very much like what we see in animals again. We see this trend where animals don't have alternation of generation, but once again, the overall trend of protecting your young. Again, it doesn't make it wrong or right, and I'm not talking ethically wrong or right, but if the only way to survive on Earth was to really put a lot of care in just a few young, there wouldn't be those critters that do it the other way around, and they do. So that means that strategy works for them today. Gosh, if I haven't said that a million times in your head, then, you know, I must have said it a million times. Oh, yeah, that's a good, you know, that's a good argument, Bradley. And unfortunately, the biggest argument I see against GMO stuff right now is the fact that we don't know what it does to you. Well, we didn't know what was on the other side of the ocean, and we sailed there anyway. I get it. You know, I get that we don't know what it does, but unless someone can show me a direct causative link between some sort of problem and GMOs, I'm going to have to kind of defer with the fact that I got no evidence against it. You know, so to me, it's not a matter of really sitting on the fence. It's a matter of parsimony. The most reasonable, you know, thing right now is we have to go with the fact that they don't seem to be harmful. Might. That's true. But then again, that's kind of like saying if you go X amount of far apart over the ocean, you'll fall off the edge. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. That's right. You know, we never would get anywhere if we don't take chances. Now there are calculated risks and non-calculated risks, and I'm always for making calculated risks. And we, you know, have done work on GMOs and effect on organismal growth and organisms, and we haven't seen any problems. But we haven't been doing it a long time. No, that's true. It's kind of like radiation. Remember? Oh my goodness, it's awful. You'd have all those guys out there witnessing those. Yeah, I agree. Yep. Those guys out there witnessing the atomic bombs going off, and they would say, "You're going to see all." They would tell me, "You're going to see all the wonderful colors of the rainbow while you're being irradiated." Poor guys. So where were we? Gametophytes, right? Getting smaller, microscopic, getting smaller. Sporophyte getting dominant. Sporophyte being the dominant growth thing. Again, the flower, the plant, the tree, that's the sporophyte. The gametophyte is microscopic. We're going to have to look under a microscope next week when we get into lab. Oh, Savannah River Ecology Lab, where I worked there, where they worked with the uranium, yeah, or tritium, the stuff that actually boosts the explosive power of nuclear weapons, which is important, of course. Okay, let's do some terminology, folks, in red. All right, take a look at those. We got female gametophytes. We got male gametophytes. They're both microscopic. The female gametophytes are found in ovulate cones. The male gametophytes are found in pollen cones. Those are the words, right? Ovulate, ovary, female, pollen, male, penis, I don't know, whatever you want to use there, but whatever works for you. In the flower, we have the female gametophytes and the male gametophytes inside the flower. You notice in the flower, what we see, right, is the male and female on the same plant. You got the male gametophytes inside the flowers and the female gametophytes. That's what you typically think about in a flower. Not all flowers are that way. Some flowers will be incomplete. They only have one sex or the other. But notice in the cone-bearing plants, right, that typically what you think about, especially in the pine trees, right, we're going to have a situation in which we have two separate things that are male and female, but they are still on the same plant, just not in the same flower. Okay, so we're kind of see this. We kind of see this thing where the angiosperms just kind of brought, brought these pieces together. Now, if you're worried about inbreeding, I'll talk about what's going to happen and how we reduce that. Does it happen? Yes. Are there ways that these organisms have evolved to minimize it? Yes. So we'll talk about those. Okay. Now the gametophytes here, what they're going to do is they're going to develop from spores inside the sporophyte. And again, let me reiterate what that does for you when you're moving into really harsh habitat. It helps you from drying out, protects you from the ultraviolet rays. Remember, even especially in the early Earth, there may not have been as much oxygen in the atmosphere. If there was a little less oxygen, then there would have been a little less ozone. If there was a little less ozone, there might have been more UV. It doesn't take a lot of UV to cause problems. And then, as I mentioned, of course, the idea of keeping the gametophyte inside the sporophyte is good because you can develop the young a little further. You can give some nutrient, and you can give some physical protection, right? You can put this hard integument around that developing young. You try to protect it. Absolutely. All those are very good ideas, correct? All those are very good ideas. However, they're not the only idea. Obviously, it's not, because we see many other ways of doing it. Okay, let's look at all this heterospory that's going on. Heterospores, spores that are different. Unlike the fern, remember, the fern is a bisexual, so it's homospores. Okay, now, seed plants are heterosporous, and again, I'm kind of emphasizing some of the roots in here to give you an idea so you can kind of remember which is which. Remember, in organisms, usually the egg is the bigger gamete, so usually the root mega is always going to be referring to the egg, the larger of the gametes. So in megasporangium, on megasporophylls are leaves. Remember, pine cones are megasporophylls, they're leaves. Flowers are megasporophylls, are leaves. They're all modified leaves. They don't look like a leaf, but they're a leaf. When you see megasporophyll, it's a leaf. Now they divide by meiosis. Boom, there's where you get your variability. And then, of course, this is all going on inside the ovule, right? And then they produce haploid megaspores. So after the megasporophylls divide by meiosis and get your variability, the result is haploid megaspores. And haploid megaspores produce eggs. Okay? And then in the male plant, it works the same way, except the fact that now we got microsporangium, microsporophylls, and what we get on with is not eggs, obviously, but pollen. Pollen grains, like you see in the picture down there in the blue. Those are pollen grains. They got little Mickey Mouse ears. See, this is where the male gametophyte is. The male pine cones there you see in the picture, which is out of focus because I didn't have my glasses on when I took it. You don't need water for male gamete or the male gamete or sperm dispersal anymore. Remember, the ferns had to swim through the droplets of water, and that's why their sperm was flagellated. You don't need flagellated sperm anymore. You can put the sperm in the pollen grain, the male gamete inside the pollen grain, and then those little ear-like things, those are empty sacs, so wind sacs. It makes it light, so you can let wind, and the wind will blow the pollen, away from the pollen cones out into the world to find a mate, because on the other side of that there is the ovule, the ovulate cone. So that's what you see in the microscope. picture. Now, Nucellus, I'll talk about that in just 1 second. There's the integument. So that's that outer sporophyte cover. Look, there's some terms you recognize. There's the archegonia. There's 2 of them. 2 archegonia. And then what's going to happen is the pollen grain, which has got the male gamete in here, if it makes it to the ovulate cone, then it's going to eventually fertilize the egg that's inside that archegonia, just like that egg that was in the archegonia and the mosses and the liverworts that you looked at. All right, now I don't, I need a blank piece of paper. Hold on. I want to talk to you about inbreeding in pine trees for just a second. So pine trees grow in stands. Trees grows in stands, groups of trees. All right. So here's my pine trees. I'm sorry, it's not a very good, but let me put a couple of them in here. I'm trying to explain to you why or how they help minimize inbreeding, and also explain to you why you might have noticed that when you look at these, when you look at pine trees, did you know that pine trees have 2 different kinds of cones? If you did, you notice that the male cones, the pollen cones, are usually out on the tips of the branches, and the female cones, the ovulate cones, are usually scattered somewhere, further down the branch. Now, the reason why that is because pine trees have evolved along with everything else through Mother Nature. And inbreeding, although it does happen, right, that pollen grains from the pollen cones could fertilize ovulate cones on the same tree. That does happen. Nothing you can do about that, okay? The way the wind blows when it hits a stand of trees tends to help minimize that, because here's what happened. This is physics. It's all connected. That's why we're always talking about this interdisciplinary approach to things we teach you in science. It's not just biology I'm teaching you. It's biology, but in order to stand, if I were a biologist, I would know that inbreeding depression is something that organisms would try to avoid. So what's the physics behind this? And would that limit maybe the size of the trees that grow together? All right, what's he talking about, the physics? When the wind hits a stand of trees, it's deflected upwards. And the wind speed and the velocity and the effect of the wind is going to be greater on the outside branches than on the inside branches. If you've ever been up a tree in a windstorm, you know you'd rather be near the trunk of the tree than out on the edge of the branches, wouldn't you? So what happens when the wind is deflected upwards, it tends, not always, to take the pollen grains from, like, say, this tree on the far right and blow them far enough downwind so that hopefully it falls into the ovulate cones of some tree a little bit further down. Isn't that brilliant? Why don't you just look at that and go, wow. I do. I just think, oh man, that Mother Nature and evolution came up with that. Oh, okay, where were we? Pollen grains, ovulate cones. All right, this picture. So those are pollen cones. Now the other kind of cones, the pine cones you might be more familiar with, those are the ovulate cones. Those are the female cones. Ovules and pollen. All right, anybody ready to move on? Let's start looking at the different groups now. Finish. Oh, I'm sorry. One more time. One more slide. I apologize. Back to the ovule again. We need a little bit of terminology. So the mega, once again, is going to be the female. Megasporangium, megaspores. So a seed, like I said, which is an ovule, is made up of 3 things. The megasporangium, which is diploid. All right. It's going to undergo meiosis to produce megaspores. Sporangium. Now, folks, the word sporangium, that's the same word I used to refer to those brown things on the back of the fern, on the fern. The sori are sporangium. Don't get all confused by the mega. The mega here is relatively speaking, but these are microscopic. We are inside of the seed of that pine. So this megasporangium undergoes meiosis, you get your variability, then you get your megaspore, and around the outside, and sometimes it's 2 layers in angiosperms and flowering plants, you're protecting that seed with that sporophytic tissue. It's stronger, more durable sporophytic tissue. And if fertilization is going to occur, then what we need to do is have a pollen grain make its way over here and actually enter in through this little opening called the micropyle. Sometimes they come down through the other way, and I'm not sure exactly how they get in there, but Most of the time what they do is they have to swim around until they find this little opening in the seed called the micropyle. And then we can jump over and look at the middle picture, right? So now we've got unification. So the male gametophyte, which is inside the pollen grain. Okay, so that, think about it, if you're thinking about that moss plant, we're talking about that male plant is now, it was retained inside something that protected it. So that forms a pollen grain, and inside, at the end of that pollen grain is the egg. And then the nucleus of the egg and the nucleus of the sperm come together. Well, we got junior, right? N plus N, and we got that developing embryo. So the egg here and that sperm nucleus there, after it swims through the pollen tube, makes the embryo. And there's the root, and there's the tip, and there's the leaves, and that we got our seed, right? Now, them pollen grains are them pollen grains are pretty strong. Let me tell you, pollen grains are covered around with sporopollenin too. Remember that stuff you got to boil in acid. So not only are they good for dispersal, they're pretty good resilient. That's that stuff you see all over your car. You know, a lot of times people think it's pine pollen. It's actually a lot of oak. Most of what you're allergic to is oak. Most of that stuff you see in your car, that yellow stuff, is pine pollen. But look at each one of those is little male gametophytes. So there's a lot of even numbers even in those. Okay, now I want to make sure that we understand the difference between these two phrases down here before we go on. Pollination and fertilization are not the same thing. Pollination is when the actual pollen arrives at the ovule. All right, so like when that picture where it's swimming or moving its way through the micropyle, not swimming. Water's not required, as I said. Wind, right? Wind pollinators, or pollinators that walk by and, you know, brush it off, and or insects that walk around on pollen cones and go over to ovulate cones. That can happen too. But just because you're pollinated doesn't mean you're fertilized. And sometimes they don't happen at the same time. Sometimes one happens well after the other one. Sometimes fertilization, which would obviously have to be after pollination, occurs over a year after pollination. Pollination is when the pollen gets there. Fertilization is when the gametes finally fuse, after the pollen tube is formed and the two nuclei come together, all right? So don't confuse those two. All right, now we can start looking at plants. All right, so the caryophyte green algae, we know those were the protist-like lineage thingamabobs that gave rise to land plants. We've talked about the mosses and the ferns, and now we're going to talk about the gymnosperms and the angiosperms. Now, one of the things you might be noticing as you're going through this semester and you're looking at your field notebook is there's a lot of place for confusion when it comes to taxonomy. For example, you're not going to find a taxonomic name called gymnosperm. And even in this chapter in your book, the guy doesn't list in, or the authors don't list any taxonomy for angiosperms. They talk about basal angiosperms. That's not a taxonomic group. It's kingdom, phylum, class is what I mean. But folks, that is the world of taxonomy, and that's the way it is, right? So like if you're looking in your field notebook, and I want you to get something from the phylum Anthophida or the phylum Pterophyta, let me type those in. Got some questions from students who got confused on that, but that's okay. I mean, that's what I'm here. That's what I'm getting ready to tell you, is make sure you get clarification with me. Anthophida are angiosperms. Pterophyta are ferns, wisp ferns, horsetails. Sometimes it says ferns and their allies. But in your textbook, which I usually try to stick with the classification in your textbook, unless I have reason to believe or want to believe or my opinion says otherwise. But Manilophyta, Manilophyta or Pterophyta, the ferns and all that, that's the same name. So if you ever get confused about that kind of stuff, make sure you get in touch with me. So gymnosperms and angiosperms, not real taxonomic names, are what we call sister clades, and they were the ones that the dinosaurs dined on. They provided food for the dinosaurs. Since the climate dried after the Carboniferous, these seed plants were selected for, right? Because seeds could deal with those dry climate. And of course, if you made some enticement to eating, to dropping seeds, and many times, Well, we always have to keep in mind that organisms co-evolve, that ecosystems evolve, that predator and prey evolve, and so that plants co-evolved with other animals. Like when we start talking about animal evolution a little bit more, you know, we talked about how that plants moved out onto land, and that made it better for other organisms. And of course, plants had to do it with mycorrhizae, right, with fungus. But the first animals who really started to make it big out on land were the insects, and that's because the insects actually were benefited by the plants, and the plants were benefited by the insects because the insects became many times the pollinators. Okay, now as the Carboniferous period gets into the dinosaur era, you know, for that 200 million years, we have both evolution of gymnosperms and angiosperms. Remember, it's not like Aristotle where one comes after the other. You know, that even back during the dinosaur era for many millions of years, there were mammals, okay? But they weren't evolving and changing a whole lot because of the pressure of the dinosaurs. But after the Mesozoic era, after the extinction event that occurs, the gymnosperms are still around, but it's the angiosperms who become more prominent, okay? And the angiosperms become more prominent most likely due to the fact that they enticed, right, with the fruits and with the flowers. Flowers and fruits are ways to increase your pollination. It's like the business that doesn't advertise versus the business that advertises. All right, I'll come back to that when we get into those and start talking about how they entice. Let's go gymnosperms first. The word gymnosperm means naked seed. Okay, gymno actually means naked, and sperm in this context means seed. So what we mean by naked seed is the seeds are in cones. These are the cone plants. They don't have a fruit. All right, most gymnosperms, folks, that you think about are conifers, the pine trees. Okay, this is a phylum of 600 species. See that ginkgo I was showing you at the beginning? A ginkgo is a gymnosperm too. See the phylum Ginkgothida, and there are other gymnosperms. Phylum Coniferophida. There we go. That's just the conifers. But no flowers, no fruits. Now, if you're wondering where in a pine cone does he keeps talking about there's a seed. Look down the lower left. There's a black and white picture that's cut through a section of a pine cone. So this is the scale of the pine cone, you know, the pieces of the pine cone. And there's the seed. SD is the whole seed. And this right here is that wing part. You know how pine seeds have that wing part? So as they come out, you know, the cones open up, the wind blows through the cones, and the seeds come out and they drift and they blow away and they disperse, right? Now we have some of those in class, so we'll take a look at it. Of course, back in the back are cypress, and those are obviously gymnosperms as well. And we're all very familiar with those here in Florida. Okay, let's look at the conifers first. 600 species. They're the biggest one. It's the pine trees, the most familiar. The pines and the coastal redwoods. Oh, look at this one. This is called the bristlecone pine. It's the oldest living tree. I think 2,000 years or something like that. Now remember what the cone is. The cone is the reproductive part. That's where the seeds are. And remember that seeds are the reproductive offspring of this plant, but they're also food for other organisms. So you're going to make a lot of seeds to overweigh that. But one of the things you might also do too, right? Do something like that to your cone. This is why it's called a bristlecone pine. Notice. So go ahead, squirrel, tear into that, right? I mean, you're going to get a meal, but you're going to work for it. And those coastal redwoods, right? Those, like this guy, look in a scale. Check this out. Like these are the ones that they can actually hollow out, and you can drive your car through. You guys ever seen those? They grow huge, amazing. Conifers, pine trees, and that sort of stuff are really sort of odd, especially when you think about the fact that we have a lot of them here in Florida. This is the longleaf pine down here in the lower right. It's a very common pine. It's called the longleaf pine because it's got long needles. The needles are the leaves, okay? Typically, we find conifers in cooler or drier climates, right? That's one of the reasons why they have the needles the way they are. They're very thick cuticle because it prevents water loss, right? Those needles are very rigid and hard, if you will, kind of pointing, right? And we talked about the cuticle like in the mangroves that helps it prevent from water loss. So they have that thick cuticle over them, so it's kind of like chapstick. They also have recessed stomata. Stomata, remember, are good because you could circulate gases through them. That's how carbon dioxide and oxygen move across. But remember, stomata are also a way to lose water. That's why there are C4 and CAM plants. Go back to your Bio 1 and review that, okay? So they retarded the water loss these stomata do by being recessed, so they don't lose as much water. Many of the conifers are what we call evergreen, and that's because they obviously stay green all around. And the reason why that is if you're up north where the winter is a lot longer and the growing season, the spring and summer, if you will, is a lot shorter, then being evergreen means you're ready to start photosynthesizing as soon as that sun starts peeking through. You know, the deciduous trees, the one that lose their leaves, they got to grow leaves first, then they can photosynthesize. So you can do that. And also with needles, you tend to lose, because of the physics, that's another part of that mixture of disciplines, you lose water more slowly through the needles, and you cool off easier as well. Now you just think, oh, wait a minute, why do we have these things in Florida, cooler, drier climates? That doesn't fit in. The soils in tropical areas, all right, the soils in tropical areas and even in subtropical areas, it's more so in tropical areas, are really not great soils. Okay, that's one of the problems in the tropical rainforests. In the tropical rainforest, when they clear down, when they clear cut the tropical rainforest and the farmer uses that field is really only good for a few years unless he does a lot of heavy fertilization. That's because in the rainforest, in the tropical regions, the rate of decomposition is very, very, very fast. When something hits the floor, when something falls down, right, and decomposition begins, there's all kinds of decomposers, bacterial kinds and protozoan kinds and insect kinds. So litter, organic material in the soil doesn't really have a lot of time to build up. It's very quickly decomposed. And because these plants are growing, you know, these huge, 90-foot tall plants, and the growth in the tropical rainforest is outrageous anyway, right? There's not a lot of turnaround time. When something gets decomposed, boom, it gets sucked up immediately. So very little is actually in the soil. So it's kind of like one of those weird enigma things. So when you cut the trees away, what you're left with is this very nutrient deficient soils, okay? Well, another place that certain species of pines tend to do well in is in those kinds of nutrient deficient soils. And Florida, being subtropical, typically has nutrient. I know when I first moved here and they showed me like, this soil, I'm like, that's sand from what I remember, right? It didn't look like soil to me. So that's why we have pines here in Florida many times, is because of the fact that they can do well in those kinds of soils too. And if you think about it, we're a lot wetter, but it gets pretty doggone hot in the summer. So plants could have to be careful about not getting too warm. So they wouldn't want to lose water. Remember with plants, the major distinguishing difference between this whole thing with water with plants and animals is plants got to store it. They can't go get it. So even here in Florida, where it rains a lot, you've still got to store water, and conifers are good at not losing water during really hot days. We get lots of things from conifers. Obviously, we get timber and paper and resin and all that sort of stuff, and the pine tar for baseball players. Taxol, which is an anti-cancer drug, is one of those herbal remedies, right? So we were talking about ginkgo biloba, and even though it doesn't appear that ginkgo biloba does anything significant for your memory, the nice thing about if we do find herbal remedies that work is they tend to have fewer or less severe side effects. So that's why when we go off into the rainforest and we deforest quite so many of the in much acres, and up some cases up to the size of the state of West Virginia in a year is cleared of rainforest. We don't know what products we might be losing from the organisms that we're causing to go extinct. We might be causing organisms to go extinct that we never knew existed. Every time we go in the rainforest, we find new organisms. So that's the danger of it. Folks, the next thing I need to talk about is the reproduction in conifers, and I don't really want to rush through it, so I want to take my time. So I'm going to kind of stop a little bit early just so we have a natural stopping point. We will finish this or begin this again on Monday, obviously, where we will do the second half of Lab 5. If for some reason you need to go back and look through some of the material from the first part of Lab 5, by all means, that's no problem. I can pull out slides or models if you need to. Other than that, if you're still interested in the field trip, by all means, please let me know. Remember, this is one in which seating is kind of limited because we do have to carpool, so I do need to have a list if you want to go. If you don't have anything else for me, folks, then I'm done with that. Have fun. Get something cool on your in your field notebooks, and you all have a good weekend then. Yes, I did. Of course. Glad to have you on, Harrison. Sure. Yeah, you too, Bradley. Take care, buddy. 28th, right? A week from Friday. Yep, no problem, buddy.